Master Chief Marcus Holt snatched the assignment sheet off the clipboard rack, looked at the 17-year-old standing at the edge of his formation, and laughed. It rolled out of him low and ugly, building fast, the kind of laugh that drags other men into it before they decide whether they want to go. His unit went with him. 12 men in tactical gear turned their heads at once like a single animal catching a scent. "They sent me a kid," Holt said, holding the paper up so the wind could see it too. "Tell me this is a joke." Nobody told him that. Brynn Calder stood at parade rest in the gravel lot, dust already settling into the seams of her boots, and she did not move. She had heard this laugh before in different rooms from different men. She had never once let it land where someone could see it land. Nevada does not negotiate. The land outside Tonopah ran flat and hard to the horizon in every direction, broken only by scrub brush and heat shimmer, and Brynn had grown up 200 miles north of here, where her father had taught her to read wind the way other kids read books. She was 5'6", 130 pounds, with the pack on gray eyes that people called cold when they didn't like her, and calculating when they did. Most people didn't like her. She watched too long before she spoke, and silence read as either stupidity or arrogance to men who had never had to sit still inside their own heads. Holt lowered the clipboard and walked toward her, boots crunching gravel, stopping 2 feet closer than was comfortable. "Calder." "Yes, sir." "Joint evaluation program, 6 weeks. He tilted the paper toward her like evidence in a trial. "Sound right to you?" "Yes, sir." He turned to his men. 6 weeks. The laughter shifted, got harder, less amusement now and more verdict. Someone near the back called out, "What division sent her chief the Girl Scouts?" The laugh that followed was bigger than the joke deserved, which told Brynn everything about how badly this unit needed someone to feel superior to this morning. A big man with a jaw built like a cinder block stepped forward, name tape reading Stroud. "Want me to walk her to the washout quarters, Chief, save everybody the 6 weeks?" "Not yet." Holt was still looking at Brynn. Something in his face shifting from contempt to clinical interest, the look of a man deciding exactly how to break something. "She's going to want the full experience. Aren't you, Calder?" "I'm here to train, sir." "You're here to fail." He said it flat, no heat in it, which was worse than heat would have been. "But I'll let you do it at your own pace." He turned away completely, already moving on. "Lassiter, get her settled. Auxiliary quarters solo. She doesn't bunk with the team until she earns it." Dewey Lassiter, mid-20s, open face, looked at her the way you look at a bag you've been told to carry that you suspect is heavier than it looks. "Come on," he said, and walked. She followed him across the lot, past men already turning back to their morning, already treating her like a problem that had been filed rather than solved. The auxiliary quarters were a single room off the main barracks, a cot, a footlocker, a window that looked at nothing but desert. Lassiter dropped her paperwork without ceremony. "Reveille's 0400, first formation 0430, Chief runs hard, no accommodations." He stopped at the door, looked back. "How old are you actually?" 17. He blinked. "Why are you here?" "Because somebody decided I should be." He stood there a second longer, then left. She set her pack down, pulled out the one personal item she'd brought, a photograph worn soft at the corners, her father standing in a field at dusk, rifle loose at his side, and set it face down on the footlocker. Then she lay back on the cot and did the thing she was best at, clearing everything out until there was nothing left but the dark and the next 4 hours of it. She slept like a closed door. The alarm found her already awake. Formation assembled in the cold before dawn, breath fogging the unit, moving into position with the automatic precision of men who had done this 10,000 times. Brynn took the end of the line. Holt walked it slow, stopping in front of each man a beat, and when he reached her, he paused 2 beats longer. "Sleep." "Yes, sir." "Good. Last sleep you'll get for a while." The first exercise was a 3-mile assessment run, full pack timed. Equipment issued her a load that weighed 65 pounds, and she strapped it on without comment and walked to the line. Stroud fell in beside her, looked at the pack, looked at her. "Want me to hold some of that?" "No. Not charity. Strategy. You drop in the first mile, you're dead weight the rest of the way." "I know. I won't drop." He studied her like she'd said something in a language he half recognized. "You're either really confident or really dumb." "Could be both." That cracked something in his face for half a second before he buried it. Holt started the clock. The first mile was clean. The second turned the terrain to loose rock, and the pack started fighting back, finding every pressure point along her hips and shoulders and charging her for each one. By the midpoint, 3 men had visibly slowed. Brynn ran steady, mechanical, paying the cost without counting it out loud. She crossed the line 11 seconds behind the unit's fastest runner, a sharp-faced man named Bo Crane, who had made a point of establishing himself early. The silence after that run was different from the silence before it. Holt wrote something on his clipboard and said nothing. Stroud muttered, "Huh," to no one, and that single syllable was the first crack in a wall that had been solid an hour ago. At the weapons table, Sergeant Pruitt ran her through chamber checks with the bored efficiency of a man who expected nothing remarkable from the next set of hands. She field-stripped the rifle in under 90 seconds, reassembled it without looking down once, and set it on the table aligned exactly parallel to the edge. Pruitt glanced at it, glanced at her, said nothing, but he made a small mark on his tablet that hadn't been there for the man before her. Obstacle work came next. A low crawl under wire, a 6-foot wall, a rope traverse over a dry culvert. Brynn matched the unit's pace without trying to beat it. At the wall, Stroud went over first and didn't offer a hand back, and she didn't need one, planting her boot against the seam and driving up and over in one motion that left her breathing harder than she let show. By noon, the unit had been at it 9 hours straight. At lunch, the men ate together at a long table while she took her tray to the far end alone. It was not an accident. She hadn't been invited to the other end, and she had no interest in forcing a seat she hadn't been offered. A tray dropped across from her anyway. Dewey Lassiter sitting before she'd agreed to it. "You don't have to sit alone. Chief's not watching." "I know." "Then why are you sitting alone?" "Because I want to." He stayed anyway. Told her his name like she might not have caught it. She told him she already knew it, knew the whole roster, had read every file she could find before the transport picked her up. That earned her a long stare and then a half smile. "That's either really impressive or really unsettling." "Probably both." He laughed short and real. "You said that to Stroud too, didn't you?" "It keeps being accurate." He told her without her asking that Holt had briefed the unit before she arrived, said she'd be gone in 48 hours, said he'd never been wrong about that call in 14 years of running this program. Brynn set down her fork. "There's a first time for everything." He asked where she'd learned to move like that. She told him plainly her father, a long-range shooter military, had started training her at 6, distance reading, breath control patience. When he couldn't train her anymore, she kept going alone. "When he couldn't train you anymore," Lassiter repeated carefully. "What happened?" "He died." She said it the way she always said it, now flat and clean, no softening, because softening it would have been a kindness to the listener and not to her. Lassiter didn't offer sympathy. She respected that more than she could have explained. "The chief's going to try to break you this afternoon," he said instead. "Heat sim. He runs it hard. He's going to load you heavier than the rest of us." "Why are you telling me?" He shrugged, picked up his tray. "Because you'll find out anyway." Then he walked off, and she finished her meal alone with new information instead of old silence. The afternoon heat simulation started at 1400, her pack now 45 pounds heavier than standard. The course wound through exposed desert with no shade temperature climbing past 109, the ground radiating heat back up through her boots, so she was being cooked from 2 directions. At the 2nd kilometer, the strap on her left shoulder began to bite through the padding, and she shifted the load a half inch without breaking stride, the kind of micro-correction her father had drilled into her until it stopped being a decision and became a reflex. One man dropped entirely, a cramp seizing his calf like a fist, and went down hard onto one knee in the gravel. Brynn walked. Not jogged, not ran-walked, with the precise, measured stride of someone who had already calculated exactly how much energy each step cost and refused to spend more than the required amount. Her face stayed flat. Inside, her body screamed. None of it reached the surface. At the 5-kilometer mark, Holt pulled alongside her in a vehicle rolling at her pace window down. "You're overheating." Face is flushed. Pace dropped. "Yes, sir." "Want to stop?" "No, sir." That's not pride, is it? It came out different than she expected, less mockery, more an actual question. "No, sir, I know the difference." He looked at her a long moment, the desert vast and burning around them both. "Why are you here, Calder?" "To prove something." "To who?" "To myself." A beat. "And to anyone who thinks this is about politics." He held her eyes 3 more seconds, then the vehicle pulled away. She finished the remaining 5 kilometers in the middle of the pack full-load peak heat, and when she crossed the line, Holt made a note on his clipboard without looking at her. That was enough. That night she sat on the floor with her rifle broken down across a towel, running a bore brush through the barrel by feel in the near dark because cleaning a weapon with her hands occupied was the only way she'd ever found to let her mind work a problem without the problem working her. Holt was the key to all of it, she thought, seating the bolt back into the receiver. He wasn't a bad man. He had built his entire definition of excellence around a template, and she didn't fit it, and the thing that made him dangerous wasn't cruelty, it was certainty. She worked the action twice to feel it run clean, then reached for the photograph and turned it over once in the lamplight. Her father in the field rifle loose, smiling at something off camera. She'd taken it herself at 9 years old. The shot doesn't care how you feel about it, he'd told her once. The shot cares about your stillness. Get still enough inside and the shot finds you. She set the photo down and got still. Tomorrow was the range. Formation came gray and cold. Holt stopped in front of her. You ever fired a precision rifle? Yes, sir. At what distance? 1,000 meters. The silence that followed had weight to it. She heard Stroud shift his boots. Somebody at the end of the line made a sound that was almost a laugh and swallowed it halfway. Holt didn't blink. And did you hit anything? Yes, sir. He held her eyes 4 full seconds before he turned and walked off without another word. The long range stretched out under a sky already starting to bend, the light heat distortion rising in slow waves. Bo Crane shot first and was excellent through 500 meters, good through 7, visibly degrading by 8. Tate Whitfield, arms crossed near the spotting scope, said nothing at all, which from him was its own kind of statement. When Holt called her name, he told her to start at 300, the warm-up distance. She told him she'd prefer 800. The range went quiet immediately, not gradually. You'd prefer, Holt said. Yes, sir. 300 won't tell either of us anything you don't already know. He studied her a long beat, looked at the range officer, looked back. 800, fine. She settled into position, felt the wind's slight drift, made the correction without checking the digital readout. Stroud said from behind her shoulder that she wasn't using the wind reader. Holt called it a mistake. Brynn didn't answer either of them. She went somewhere else, not absent, more present than she'd been all morning, and the shot broke clean. Center mass, a 1/4 inch off dead center. Hit, the range officer called, and the silence after was different from the silence before. Holt moved her to 900. Hit. 1,000. The range went very still. 1,000 meters wasn't a training distance. It was the line that separated good shooters from rare ones, and everyone on that range knew it. She heard someone whisper, "No way," behind her. Again, Holt said. She fired the 1,000-meter shot 4 times, hit 4 times. On the 4th, someone exhaled hard enough to hear, and Stroud made a sound that wasn't quite a word. Holt called, "Stand down," and when she turned around, every man on that range was looking at her with something suspended between mockery and welcome that hadn't decided yet what it was going to be. "Where'd you learn to shoot?" Holt said. "My father. Military." "Where is he now?" "Dead, sir." He held her eyes. "How long have you been shooting long range?" "Since I was 8. Seriously, since I was 10. Holt turned to the unit. "Break 20 minutes. The men dispersed, and Brynn found shade against the equipment wall and let her hands rest still in her lap. Lassiter materialized beside her. 4 for 4 at 1,000 meters, with a rifle you picked up this morning. It was a good rifle. Calder." Her name carried weight when he said it. "Crane's personal best at 1,000 is 2 for 5. 2 years he's been shooting this range. You went 4 for 4 on your first morning. That's not normal." "I know. I've known a long time it's not normal. Does it scare you?" "When people find out..." She thought about that honestly. "No. What scares me is when they find out and still don't change." He told her the kill house was next, not marksmanship decision-making under pressure, terrain reading, team coordination. She told him she already knew that. He asked if she understood it was a layered test. She told him there was always a third test after that one that measured what you did when the situation stopped being controlled. The kill house ran reinforced corridors built to disorient by design. Holt briefed the rules outside: clear every room call, every threat team, integrity above individual action. Brynn went third through the door between Stroud and a sequence of men clearing rooms, with the practiced rhythm of people who had done this hundreds of times. The first room cleared in 11 seconds. The second held a target that popped from a closet on a timer, and Stroud put 2 rounds into it before it finished swinging open. The third room was empty, and they cleared it anyway, full procedure, no shortcuts. In the fourth room she saw it. A wire, low, almost invisible, strung at ankle height across the threshold leading to the central hub. "Hold!" Her voice came quiet but clear. "Threshold wire, ankle height, rigged to the left support panel." Stroud, 2 steps ahead, turned and looked again. "I don't see it." "It's there." "Could be shadow," another man said. "It's not shadow." Holt's voice cut through the comm. "Calder, what's the delay?" "Possible tripwire corridor 4, calling a halt for confirmation." A pause. "Stroud, do you confirm?" "Negative, sir. I don't see it." Another pause, and this one had a decision buried in it. "Advance." "Sir, if I'm right and we advance, we lose the team. And if you're wrong, you've cost us 60 seconds. A beat. "Advance, Stroud." Stroud looked at her. She looked at him. She watched the calculation happen behind his eyes, instinct against rank, and watched him choose rank. He stepped through the threshold. Every light in the kill house flared red. 3 flat tones blared from the overhead speaker, and Holt's voice came through with the verdict. "Simulation terminated. Full unit KIA. Wire triggered on advance. That's everyone." The silence inside the kill house had a specific texture. The silence of men who had just been told they were dead and knew someone had tried to stop it and hadn't been listened to. Brynn walked out into the heat and kept her face neutral because there was nowhere productive for the frustration to go. Holt came out of the control facility, jaw set, looked at his men first, then at her. "Calder called it," he said. "She halted the advance. I overruled her. The team is dead." He let that sit flat and undecorated. That is not a criticism of Calder. That is a criticism of this team's inability to process a credible threat assessment from an unfamiliar source. He paused. "We run it again." They ran it 4 more times. On the second run, the threat actor popped from a side corridor she'd flagged as a blind spot before they'd even cleared the room, and she put 2 rounds of simunition into the target before Brecker had fully turned. On the third, she called a false positive on a shadow that turned out to be exactly that, and owned the miss out loud the second the all-clear sounded. No hedging, no excuse. On the fourth, Stroud himself caught a threat half a second before she did, and called it first, and she told him so flatly and watched something in his shoulders loosen that had been locked since the moment she'd arrived. By the 5th run, Owen Brecker had started moving on her word before waiting for Holt's confirmation. That was the shift. Small, real. At the debrief outside the kill house, Stroud said something she hadn't expected. "Calder." He said her name without the contempt that had lived in it the day before. "Good call on the wire." "Thank you." He nodded once and looked away, and it wasn't friendship and it wasn't welcome, but it was the first thing he'd given her that wasn't designed to diminish her. A door barely open. That evening she sat on the floor again, rifle disassembled across the towel, running the day through her hands instead of letting it run loose in her chest. 2 days in, 11 seconds behind on a run, 4 for 4 at 1,000 meters, a wire nobody else could see. She thought about her father standing in that field at dusk, the rifle loose at his side, the way he never once told her the world would be fair, only that fairness wasn't the thing she needed from it. 40 miles north of the base in terrain the program's maps marked as empty, 4 men lay motionless in a scrape they'd dug into the hillside 2 nights earlier. Optics trained on the lit windows of a building none of them had been authorized to be watching. They had counted the formations timed, the patrols logged the rotation of the night guard down to the minute. They were patient men, professionally patient, the kind of patient that doesn't announce itself until it's ready to. Neither Brynn nor anyone on that base knew they existed yet. She seated the bolt back into the receiver, worked the action twice to feel it run clean, and set the rifle aside. She reached for the photograph, looked at her father's face in the lamplight, and set it down without lingering. Tomorrow would be harder. She'd built that prediction off 2 days of watching how Holt escalated testing one dimension at a time before stacking pressure on all of them at once. The march was coming. The endurance proof. The thing that would tell him whether what she'd shown him so far was real or just good weather. She closed her eyes. Somewhere outside the fence, the watching had already begun, and it would take 3 more days for the two kinds of patients, hers and theirs, to finally collide. The march began at 1300 full tactical load, no shade stations, no vehicle support on the road. Holt stood in front of the formation in the white glare of midday and laid it out flat. 20 kilometers. If you go down, you radio in and you stay where you are until extraction comes. Extraction means you're done for the day, and you take that hit to your eval. He looked down the line. Any questions? Nobody had any. They all knew why he'd scheduled it for the hottest window of the day. Nobody asked because asking would have meant admitting they cared. Brynn's pack carried 40 additional pounds above standard, same as the day before the weight. She'd come to think of less as punishment and more as a question Holt kept asking her in a language only her body could answer. She'd repacked it that morning with the systematic attention her father had drilled into her before she was old enough to understand why it mattered. Every strap adjusted, the extra weight settled low where the body carries it most efficiently. Still brutal. But brutal and broken were different things, and she intended to stay on the right side of that line for as long as her legs would let her. The first 3 kilometers were about finding the unit's rhythm, and she slid into it without trying to impose herself on it. She wasn't here to set the pace. She was here to survive it in a way that kept making Holt's first conclusion about her harder and harder to hold on to. At the 4-kilometer mark, something shifted in her right hip. Not pain, yet. A warning, the kind of signal her father had taught her to read the way other people read weather. She adjusted her stride a half degree, shifting a fraction more weight to the left, and paid the cost in efficiency without comment. Beside her, a quiet man named Tate Whitfield said without looking at her, "You're favoring your right. Managing a strain. Want me to take some of your load?" She looked at him. His face stayed neutral, the offer delivered in the same flat, practical tone he probably used for everything. "No," she said. "Thank you." He nodded. "Offer stands." They walked another kilometer in silence before he spoke again. "I read your father's service record." She kept her stride even. "How?" "Stroud pulled it after the range yesterday, passed it around." A pause. "Your father was at Kandahar in '09. "Yes. I was at Kandahar in '09. He was still looking forward, but something in the line of his jaw had changed. "Not personally, but I knew his work. Everybody in country knew his work." Another pause, longer this time. "He was the best long-range shooter I ever saw operate before or since. I didn't know he had a kid." He didn't talk about personal things. "No," Whitfield said. "He wouldn't have." He glanced at her, then briefly, directly. "You shoot like him. I saw it yesterday, not just the accuracy, the stillness, the way you go somewhere else when you're on the gun." He looked forward again. "I've only ever seen one other person shoot like that." She said nothing. There was nothing to say. The words went somewhere inside her that she didn't use for tactical assessment, and she let them sit there without examining them, because examining them now would have cost her the focus the next 16 kilometers were going to demand. By the 6-kilometer mark, the heat had peaked 111 degrees, still air, full sun. She heard the unit's breathing change around her, the subtle thickening that happens when bodies start spending resources they'd rather hold on to. At kilometer 7, a man went down, not dramatically, just slowed, stopped, hands on his knees, breathing with the deliberate focus of someone managing a system in open revolt. Holt was at his side in 30 seconds. "Radio in." "Sir, I'm good." "That's not a discussion." Holt's voice didn't rise, which made it land harder. "Radio in." The man keyed his radio, requested extraction, and Holt put a hand on his shoulder for exactly 2 seconds before turning back to the formation and calling the move out. Brynn watched that exchange and filed it the way she filed everything, the hand on the shoulder, the 2 seconds he hadn't wanted to show and had shown anyway. There was a man inside the machinery of Marcus Holt that 14 years of hardening hadn't entirely burned out. At kilometer 11, her hip sent a sharper signal. She absorbed it and kept walking. At kilometer 13, Dewey Lassiter drifted back through the formation until he was beside her. "You're still favoring the right." "I'm aware. It's getting worse." "I know, Lassiter." His voice dropped. "Nobody would think less of you if you—" "I'm going to finish," she said. "So you can walk beside me or ahead of me, but either way I'm finishing." He was quiet a moment. Then he said, "Okay," and stayed beside her. The last 7 kilometers were the most honest thing she had done in years. Nothing to perform, nothing to manage, only the step in front of the one before it, the heat sitting on her like an added weight, the hip graduating from warning signal to constant conversation. She didn't radio in. She didn't slow below the unit's pace. She didn't let it touch her face. At kilometer 19, Holt fell back along the formation until he was beside her. He didn't say anything for a full minute. The finish marker was close enough now to see the most beautiful thing she'd looked at in 3 days. "The hip," he said finally. "Yes, sir." "Since when?" "Kilometer 4. He went quiet, processing that. 15 kilometers of managed pain at full load in 111 degrees. "Why didn't you take Whitfield up on the offer?" he said. She looked at him. "How do you know he offered?" "Because I told him to." She stopped walking. 1 full second, her body overriding her surprise before it resumed the march on its own. Holt kept pace without acknowledging the pause. "You told him to offer," she said. "I wanted to see what you'd do." He let that sit. "You said no, which is either pride or principle, and I've been trying to figure out which for the last 9 kilometers. Which do you think it is?" He was quiet a moment. "Principle. Pride would have made you show, it made you want them to see how hard it was and still refuse. You didn't want them to see how hard it was, you just responded." A pause. "That's different. It's the kind of different that takes a long time to learn. Most people never learn it." They crossed the line at 16:47, Brynn in the middle of the pack, which meant she had matched pace with fully loaded, fully trained Navy SEALs for 20 kilometers in extreme heat, with a hip injury that had started at kilometer 4. She put her hands on her knees for exactly 3 seconds, then straightened. Holt was standing 20 feet away, looking at her with an expression she hadn't seen on him before. Not admiration, not warmth. The specific look of a man who has been shown something he cannot dismiss and is now in the uncomfortable position of revising a conclusion he'd already committed to. He held her eyes a long moment, then turned away to run his end-of-March assessment of the unit. Owen Brecker appeared beside her. "Hip's going to need ice and compression tonight." He said it the way medically trained people discuss injuries, a problem to be solved, not a vulnerability to be noted. "I know. I'll get you the kit." "Thank you." He nodded and walked off, and she limped slightly on the way back to the auxiliary quarters, letting herself limp because there were no eyes on her anymore and no point performing for an empty desert. She sat on the cot and applied the ice he'd left outside her door and ran the day through her hands the way she always did, except tonight her hands were busy holding ice instead of a rifle, so she ran it through her mind instead. Holt had told Whitfield to offer. Holt had walked beside her for the last kilometer. Holt had named the principle behind her refusal correctly and without prompting. She wasn't certain what that meant. She wasn't going to assume it meant more than it did. But something in the composite he was building had shifted the way you feel weather changing before the sky does anything visible. She turned the photograph over her father's face, caught in the lamplight, the field, the rifle loose at his side. "They're starting to look," she said quietly. "Not see yet, but look." She set it down and closed her eyes. Tomorrow was the advanced sniper evaluation. She'd known it was coming since the second day. Holt was a man of deliberate structure, testing one dimension at a time before stacking pressure on all of them at once. The range had been the introduction. The kill house had been the team context. The march had been the endurance proof. Tomorrow would combine all of it under live conditions with stakes attached. She let it go. She slept. The hip woke her at 2:43 in the morning, not sharp. The deep settled ache of tissue pushed past its comfortable range and now filing its complaint in the quiet hours when nothing else competed for her attention. She lay still and assessed it the way her father had taught her to assess everything: systematic, honest. No minimizing, no catastrophizing. Sore, not injured. The difference mattered, and she knew how to tell them apart. She got up and worked through a slow series of stretches in the dark, unglamorous and uncomfortable, the kind of maintenance most people skip because it produces no visible result until the day it prevents something much worse. By 3:20, the ache had dropped to manageable. She dressed and sat on the edge of the cot, running the coming day through her mind. Moving targets, multiple distances, heat distortion, the eyes of the entire unit calibrating against whatever she did first. She was ready. She told herself that plainly without drama or inflation. The only real question was whether Holt would be able to see what she did clearly enough to call it accurately when it happened. Formation came gray and cold. Holt stopped in front of her, looked at her the way he'd been looking at her since the end of the march. Not with the dismissal of day one, but with something more careful, like a man looking at something he'd picked up and turned over in his hand several times and still couldn't fully account for. "Hip," he said. "Functional, sir." "I didn't ask if it was functional, I asked about the hip." "Sore, not injured. I know the difference." He held her eyes a moment. "I know you do." He moved on. At 8:15, Holt assembled the unit at the advanced range clipboard in hand and didn't look at it once while he spoke. "Moving targets. Multiple distances. Heat distortion. You'll be scored on accuracy, speed, decision-making. No shoot targets are integrated into the sequence. Engage one automatic fail. Fail to engage a live target in the window, you lose the shot." He paused. "Rotation order is reverse of standard. Calder goes first." The silence that followed had a particular texture. She'd expected to go last, the same pressure play he'd used before, make her stand and watch everyone else perform, let the silence before her turn do the work. First was different. First meant the unit would calibrate against whatever she did with no reference point of her own to lean on. She stepped to the line. The first target appeared at 400 meters, moving laterally. She tracked it, breathed, fired. Hit. The second appeared at 600 faster, a no-shoot crossing its path seconds before the window opened. She waited. The no-shoot passed. The window opened. She fired. Hit. The third target appeared at 800 meters, heat distortion rising off the ground in visible waves bending the air between her and the target until the geometry of the shot became a negotiation instead of a calculation. She breathed in, held, adjusted, fired. Hit. Someone behind her made a sound that wasn't words. The fourth target appeared at 950 meters, moving diagonally, harder than lateral movement because the angle of the shot kept changing instead of holding steady. She tracked it, breathed, found that particular stillness, fired. Hit. The fifth target appeared at 1,200 meters. No one had briefed 1,200 meters. The standard evaluation topped out at 1,000. 1,200 in heat distortion against a moving target wasn't a training distance. It was the kind of shot that ended up in after-action reports passed around among people who understood exactly what it meant. She heard Holt say very quietly to no one in particular, "Let's see." The target moved slowly enough that movement itself was barely the variable. The variable was everything else, 1,200 meters of heated, unstable air-bending light in ways that meant she wasn't shooting at where the target was, but at where the physics of the air and the trajectory of the round would bring them together at a point that existed only inside the calculation. Her father's voice. Not a memory. A presence. Get still enough inside and the shot finds you. She went still. She fired. 3 full seconds of silence before the call. Nobody moving, nobody breathing, the desert holding everything suspended. Hit. The range officer's voice came out different than it had on any previous call, like the word itself had surprised him. Nobody said anything for 4 seconds. Then Stroud said, "What?" Not a question, an involuntary word produced by a brain that had received information it hadn't prepared for. She stepped back from the line and turned around. Every man on that range was looking at her. Holt was looking at her, his face doing something she hadn't seen it do before, not cracking, not softening, something more internal, a recalibration happening in real time, visible only because she'd spent 4 days learning his resting state well enough to recognize when it changed. "Unit rotation begins," he said, his voice level. "Crane." Bo Crane stepped up. He was genuinely good, and she respected that without qualification. He hit 4 of 5 cleanly. On the 1,200-meter shot, he fired twice, adjusted, hit on the second attempt. Strong score, textbook process. Not hers. Stroud went last in the main rotation. He fired cleanly through the first 4. On the 5th, at 1,200 meters, he held for a long time, longer than anyone before him, calculating, working through the variables, applying a methodology that had served him for a decade. He fired. Missed. He stepped back from the line and stood a moment with his back to the unit, shoulders set, and she understood she was watching a man absorb something difficult with everything he had. Holt tallied the scores, looked up. "Calder, 5 for 5, 1,200 confirmed, unit high score by a margin I'm not going to read out loud because I want all of you to calculate what it means for yourselves." Stroud turned around. His face was controlled, but his eyes went straight to her and held there a beat too long, and what was in them wasn't what she'd expected. Not resentment. Something more complicated, the look of a man who'd just been shown something that cost him, deciding in real time what to do with the cost. "Good shooting, Calder," he said. "Flat, direct, no warmth, but no edge either." "Thank you, Stroud." She meant it. He nodded once and looked away. Lassiter found her during the break, itemizing it out loud like he was reading a manifest. 5 for 5, 1,200 meters, moving target, heat distortion. He looked at her. "Do you understand that in 14 years of running this evaluation, nobody's ever gone 5 for 5? "I didn't know that." Holt never tells anyone beforehand. Doesn't want the number to become the target. A pause. Previous high was 4 for 5. Crane 8 months ago. Holt told him it was the best performance he'd seen in a decade. She filed that away without letting it show. At 1500 hours, Holt ran the briefing, gave her score once clearly, and moved on without editorializing. Then he announced the night movement exercise teams of 3 designated route threat actors positioned along the way. Identify them before they identify you. Her team posted as herself, Brecker, and Whitfield. The night came down cold and absolute, the kind of dark that exists only far from any city, and the 3 of them moved through it with a working rhythm that settled in by the first kilometer. Brecker reading terrain, Whitfield handling comms, Brynn reading signatures. The small tells that meant a human presence before the human presence became visible. At the 4-kilometer mark, she stopped so suddenly that Brecker walked a step past her before catching himself. Whitfield froze. "What?" Brecker said, very quiet. She was looking at a ridge to the northeast. The exercise route ran southwest of their position. The ridge was outside the boundary. "There's something on that ridge," she said. "Northeast sector's outside the exercise zone," Whitfield said. "I know." "Heat signatures," Brecker said. "Movement." She kept her eyes on the dark line of the ridge. "And no light discipline I can read. That's too clean for a training actor. Training actors run standard IR gear. Whatever's up there is running full blackout." Brecker and Whitfield looked at each other. Whitfield keyed his radio quiet. "Control, this is Team 1. We have observed anomalous movement on the northeast ridge outside exercise boundary. Requesting confirmation no assets are operating in that sector." A pause. Then Holt's voice, measured and clear. "Team 1 northeast sector is clear. Continue your route." She looked at the ridge again. "Something is up there," she said. "The chief just told us the sector's clear." "I know what he said." She stood in the dark and felt the particular weight of the moment, the choice between the authority she'd been operating under for 4 days and the information her own senses were delivering. She thought about the kill house, the wire, the same configuration, exactly her certainty, Holt's authority, the cost of deferring. "Brecker," she said, "you have the secondary radio." "Yeah." "Call the base operations line, not the exercise channel. Tell them we've observed possible unauthorized activity on the northeast ridge and request visual confirmation from base security." He looked at her 3 full seconds. Then he pulled the secondary radio. What happened next happened fast. The ridge erupted. Not metaphorically, not the way things erupt in training scenarios with controlled charges and pre-announced effects. It erupted with the specific, unmistakable sound of live weapons fire, the crack and echo no simulation has ever successfully replicated. The difference between that sound and every training sound she'd heard in 4 days was so total, so immediate, that her body was already moving before her mind had finished processing what it meant. Down, cover, now. Brecker and Whitfield hit the ground. Over the exercise radio chaos erupted multiple voices stepping on each other, and then Holt's voice cutting through all of it, stripped of its managerial calm, something underneath it that might have been the first honest fear she'd ever heard from him. "All teams, this is not an exercise. I repeat, this is not an exercise. Live fire on the northeast ridge. All teams take cover and hold position." 3 seconds later, his voice again harder. "Who called the base operations line?" Whitfield into his radio. "Team 1, sir. Calder called it." A silence that lasted exactly 2 seconds. Then Holt's voice leveled despite everything underneath it. "All teams fall back to secondary positions. Calder, Brecker, Whitfield, you're on point. Guide the response." She was already up and moving before he finished the sentence. The night around her, no longer dark and quiet, but full of sound and motion, and the compressed, brutal weight of a situation that had stopped being controlled. She moved through the dark with the same stillness she brought to a rifle because it turned out stillness wasn't specific to marksmanship. It was specific to pressure, and pressure was what this was. The compressed minutes that followed had none of the clean sequential order of a training exercise. Radio traffic stacked on radio traffic. Security teams converged from 3 directions at once, headlights cutting hard lines through the dark, and Brynn called positions and read the terrain and kept her team moving toward cover without ever raising her voice above what the moment required. Brecker stayed on her left shoulder the whole way, reading ground she couldn't see in time to call it, and Whitfield ran comms clean and fast, and the 3 of them moved like something that had been built for exactly this, even though none of them had known it until tonight. Holt reached their position 11 minutes after the first shot, coming in low and fast, breathing hard, his face carrying the look of a man running towards something he didn't yet fully understand. He found her crouched behind a low rise of scrub and rock, Brecker and Whitfield flanking her, all 3 of them still and oriented toward the ridge. "How long?" he said. "I flagged the movement 4 minutes before the first shot." He absorbed that. 4 minutes during which he had told her on the record over the exercise channel that the sector was clear. 4 minutes during which, if she had deferred, the team would have walked straight into whatever had been waiting up there. He said nothing for a moment. Around them, the organized urgency of a security response moved through the dark vehicles, radio chatter, the particular controlled chaos of professionals working a problem they hadn't expected to have tonight. "You were right," he said finally. "Yes, sir." Then when he didn't move, didn't speak, she said it again, quieter. "Yes, sir." He looked at her a long time, and what crossed his face wasn't simple. It wasn't just the recalibration she'd been watching accumulate for 4 days. It was something more fundamental, a man confronting the specific kind of humility that only arrives when the thing you dismissed turns out to be the thing that kept you alive. And you can't pretend anymore that you don't understand what that costs you. "How did you see it?" he said. "Movement discipline. No IR signature. Training actors glow even when they think they're being careful. Whatever was on that ridge wasn't glowing." She paused. "You read that in the dark at 4 kilometers. My father taught me to read dark." She kept her eyes on the ridgeline, the desert cold and vast and indifferent around them both. He said most people stop using their eyes at night because they're waiting for light. You don't need light. You need patience, and you need to know what normal looks like so you can feel it when something isn't. Holt was quiet for a long time. Then he said something she didn't expect in a voice stripped of rank and instruction and 14 years of armor. "I've been wrong about you," he said. "Since the first minute, I've been wrong." She said nothing because there was nothing to say, and because sometimes the most useful thing you can give a man who has arrived at a hard truth is the space to stand inside it without being managed. She let him stand in it. The desert held them both. The base did not sleep that night. Security ran the ridge for 3 hours and came back with evidence nobody wanted to process. But everyone had to boot prints, shell casings, a firing position occupied by at least 4 people, professional equipment, the specific patience that doesn't belong to opportunists. Whoever had been up there had been there a while. They had watched the formations. They had timed the patrols. And they had withdrawn cleanly and fast the instant the base operations line was called, which meant they had been monitoring communications closely enough to know in real time that they'd been made. Holt sat in the operations room until past 2 in the morning with the base security commander and 2 men in civilian clothes who arrived 40 minutes after the incident and never introduced themselves. Brynn knew what that meant. She didn't need the introduction. She sat in the auxiliary quarters and waited, not because anyone had told her to, but because the night's events had moved into territory above her clearance, and her job now was to stay out of the way of the people whose job it was to work the problem. At 2:15, Brecker knocked on her door. Still in full tactical kit, his face carrying the particular exhaustion of someone running on the last of an adrenaline reserve. "Chief wants you in the operations room." She followed without asking questions. The room smelled like coffee gone bitter and dry erase marker, the specific tension of people who'd been working a problem too long in too small a space. Holt sat at the head of the table. The civilians were gone. Whitfield was there. Lassiter stood against the far wall, arms crossed, the look of a man who'd already been in this room a while. "Sit," Holt said. She sat. He laid both hands flat on the table the way people do when they're gathering themselves around something difficult. "The individuals on the ridge were a hostile surveillance team," he said. We believe they'd been monitoring this facility for somewhere between 72 and 96 hours, positioned specifically to observe tonight's exercise. Whether that's coincidence of timing or something targeted is still being worked. A pause. If they hadn't withdrawn when they did, if our teams had continued on the primary route, we'd have walked the unit directly into their observation zone, possibly into something worse than observation. The room was very quiet. You called it 4 minutes out, he said. Whitfield confirms the timeline. Brecker confirms it. My own radio log confirms it. He held her eyes. If you hadn't called it, and if Brecker hadn't run the secondary line on your instruction, this conversation would be happening in a very different context. She said nothing. I want to understand your process, he said. Walk me through exactly what you saw and when. She walked him through it, precise, chronological, no embellishment. Movement observed outside the boundary. Discipline inconsistent with training actors. Absence of standard signature. The decision to use the secondary channel instead of the exercise channel built directly off the Kill House lesson. The understanding that the control mechanism in a controlled environment is usually the thing most likely to be compromised. When she finished, Holt was quiet a moment. How did you know to go secondary? He said. I didn't know, she said honestly. I assessed. The exercise channel was the control mechanism. If whoever was on that ridge was monitoring our communications, that channel was the first thing they'd have covered. He nodded slowly, looked at Whitfield, and something passed between them she didn't have a complete read on. Full written debrief by 0800, he said. Timeline observations, decisions, rationale, everything. Yes, sir. Go get some sleep first, 2 hours minimum. That's an order. She stood, was almost to the door when Lassiter said her name. She stopped, looked back. He was still against the wall, arms still crossed, but his face had something open in it now. For what it's worth, he said, we're all still alive because you wouldn't let it go. She held his eyes a moment, then said, Go get some sleep, Lassiter, and walked out. She slept 2 hours and 12 minutes, wrote the debrief in 90, and submitted it at 7:48. Then she went to formation. The unit assembled in early light, and she took her position not at the end of the line. She'd stopped being at the end of the line 2 days ago, but this morning it felt different. The positions around her felt chosen instead of assigned. Holt walked the line differently this morning, less of the impenetrable forward momentum that had become his default. He stopped in front of Stroud, took the security report, moved down the line, and stopped in front of her. He didn't ask for a report. He looked at her a moment. How's the hip? Better, sir. Good. He started to move on, then stopped and turned to face the entire formation in the early light. Last night, Calder made a judgment call that overrode my direct instruction, and she was right. He let that land before he kept going, speaking to her, but meaning it for all of them. That doesn't mean authority doesn't matter. It means authority without the humility to be corrected by better information isn't authority. It's just noise. He held her eyes. You weren't insubordinate last night. You were right. And you had the discipline to find the correct channel for being right, which is the harder skill. He nodded once. Good work. He moved on. She kept her face neutral, but something held at tension for 5 days, released by a degree. Not completely. A degree. Later that morning in the equipment shed, Holt called her in while he worked through his own weapons maintenance routine. Hands busy with the bolt carrier, eyes mostly on the work instead of on her, which she understood now was deliberate. A man who said hard things more easily when his hands had somewhere else to be. When I got your assignment, he said, running a patch through the barrel, I read your file, your scores, your evaluations from your previous program. They were exceptional, off the standard scale in several categories. He set the patch aside, picked up another. And I dismissed them. Deliberately. Not because I thought they were fake, because I've watched exceptional paper produce mediocre field results often enough that I built a standing policy of treating exceptional scores as a liability until proven otherwise. He looked up at her, then briefly. I treated your file like a policy case, not like a person. She said nothing. That was wrong, he said. Not tactically, as a matter of how you treat people. He set the rifle down, faced her fully now. I threw your file in the dirt. I laughed in front of my unit. I loaded you heavier specifically to accelerate your failure. I told my men before you ever got here that you'd be gone in 48 hours, and I said it like the outcome was already decided." He paused. "None of that was acceptable, regardless of how you performed." She hadn't expected this. Assessment, professional recalibration, the language of institutional correction that she'd expected. Not this. Something closer to an actual accounting. "Why are you telling me this?" she said. "Because you deserve to hear it." He held her eyes. "I've sent the same message to every person who came through this program and didn't fit my template. You're the first one who stayed long enough and performed clearly enough to make me look at what that message actually was." A beat. "The message was that you needed my permission to be what you are. You don't. You never did. She sat with that. A long moment, felt the weight of it moving through her. 5 days of being laughed at, loaded down, dismissed, overridden, proving herself into a silence that kept refilling the second she emptied it. She let herself feel the anger of it clearly for exactly as long as it needed to be felt. Then she set it down. Not because it wasn't valid, because carrying it forward served nothing now. "I accept it," she said. He nodded. "Can I say something?" she said. "Go ahead." "You were testing me. I understood that from the first day. The load, the rotation order, the kill house override." A pause. "But the way you tested me was also telling your unit something. It told them the default response to something unfamiliar is dismissal. And they learned that because they were following your lead." She held his eyes. "When you changed, they changed. Not all of them at once, but they followed you the same direction they'd been following you before. That's the thing about being the one at the front. People go where you go." He was quiet long enough that she wondered if she'd pushed too far. Then he said, "That's the most accurate and most uncomfortable thing anyone's said to me in a long time." "I know. I said it anyway." Something that was unmistakably a smile crossed his face. Brief, real, gone fast, but not before she'd seen it clearly. "I'm submitting a recommendation this morning," he said. "Your designation goes from provisional to full integration effective immediately. Same standard as everyone else for the rest of the 6 weeks. No separate protocols, no additional load." "The same standard," she said. "The same standard," he said, "which based on current evidence the rest of my unit may need to work to maintain." She almost smiled. He reached into a drawer in the equipment locker and took out a thin envelope, held it out to her. "This came through command channels this morning before the incident report had even finished processing. Somebody in the intelligence community has apparently been watching your evaluation remotely." She opened it, read it once, read it again. A letter of interest from a joint special operations task force referencing her range scores, her evaluation performance, and somehow already the incident on the ridge. A request that she be considered for a specialized long-range reconnaissance and threat assessment program classified above her current clearance. "They move fast," she said. "Yes." He held her eyes. "You don't have to answer now. You don't have to answer at all. This is your decision, not mine, and not anyone else's." A pause. "But I want you to know something. Whatever you decide, whatever program you go to or don't, what you are isn't common. I've been doing this 14 years, trained a lot of people, and what you have is genuinely rare. The instinct, the accuracy, the thing your father gave you and that you kept building on your own after he was gone." His voice stayed level, no sentiment in it at all. "People who have that have an obligation to use it, not to prove anything, not to earn anyone's permission, because the alternative is a waste, and waste is the one thing I've never been able to tolerate." She looked down at the letter, then folded it once and set it on the desk between them. "I'll respond after the 6 weeks," she said. "I came here to finish what I started." Holt looked at her a moment, then nodded. "Good. Just that." She stood, walked to the door, stopped with her hand on the frame. "Master Chief?" He looked up. "The way you ran that debrief this morning, the way you owned your call in front of your whole unit." She held his eyes. "Not everyone can do that." "Neither can everyone do what you did last night," he said. She nodded once and walked out. The unit was already gathered in the training yard when she came out of the operations building. Not called to formation. Just there the way people gather in the aftermath of something significant needing the proximity of others who'd shared it. Lassiter was there. Whitfield. Brecker stood slightly apart, present and solid the way he always stood. Even Crane, talking with another man near the equipment rack, glanced up and gave her a single nod, which she returned. Stroud was the one who did it. He stood near the center of the group, turned when she walked in, and said it loud enough for everyone to hear. "Calder." She stopped, looked at him. "Good call last night." No edge in it, no qualifier, just the words plain as a man stating a fact about the weather. "Thank you, Stroud." He held her eyes a beat longer than was strictly necessary. And what was in them, if you were watching closely and had spent 5 days learning to read the space between what people showed and what they meant, wasn't just respect. It was the particular regard that passes between people who have tested each other honestly and come out the other side knowing exactly what the other one is worth. He gave a single nod. She returned it. The conversation moved on around them, easy and a little frantic, the energy of people processing something real together, and she stood in the middle of it without feeling like an outsider, without feeling like a liability or a checkbox or a girl who'd wandered somewhere she didn't belong. She felt like exactly what she was. That evening, she sat in the auxiliary quarters with her rifle on her lap, not breaking it down this time, just holding it, the weight of it familiar in her hands the way it had been familiar from the first morning. She picked up the photograph and looked at her father's face in the lamplight, the field, the rifle loose at his side, the smile for something off camera. She'd carried this photograph through everything since the day he died, and she looked at it now the way she'd learned to look at it, carrying the loss and the gratitude at the same time, without trying to separate them anymore. "I finished the march," she said quietly. "Went 5 for 5 at 1200, called the Ridge." She turned the photograph slightly toward the lamp. "I think they see me now." She set it down face up this time and let the day settle around her instead of reaching for the next problem. Outside, the Nevada desert stretched dark and vast, and indifferent stars, unobstructed and enormous, older than every argument anyone had ever had about who belonged where. She thought about a girl of 13 standing alone in a field after her father was gone, making a quiet, private decision that the loss wasn't going to be the end of the story. That she was going to take everything he'd given her and keep building. That she was going to walk into every room that told her she didn't belong and stay until the room changed its mind. She had stayed. The room had changed its mind. Brynn Calder was 17 years old. She was 5 days into a 6-week program in the Nevada desert. There was a classified letter sitting on a commander's desk in a unit that had started the week calling her a science experiment and ended it standing beside her in the dark. She closed her eyes. She wasn't done. She was just getting started.